Good morning, folks. It's time for us to begin. Welcome those who are watching on the live stream. We're in the book of Esther. Today we'll be looking at chapter 2. And we're calling this study Esther for such a time as this. In Esther chapter 2, Esther becomes the Queen of Persia. And we've looked at her map a number of times to see the size of the empire of that day and remind you, especially those watching online, that we're using the Bible app. If you have problems getting to that, you can follow along, take notes, answer questions. I got some questions there. Got the text on there this time from Esther chapter 2. So a good tool for us to use to continue our study. It's a beautiful day, kind of cold outside. It may not be quite as warm as we'd like for it to be in here. I think we got some heat problems, but they're working on that. And, if you get cold, just chill out, I guess, or go outside and you'll warm up real quick. Esther chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Let's read together. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's attendants who served him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, and to the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given them. Then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti." And the matter pleased the king, and he did accordingly. So, as we look at this passage here, Xerxes was the king of Persia from 486 to 464 BC. He's also called Ahasuerus. That's what he's called in the scripture. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. In chapter 1 and verse 3, we noticed that he had these great banquets, and this was a fundraiser to gain support of his princes and nobles throughout the empire to provide both army and money and navy to conquer Greece. That was his plan. And at that banquet, one of them, Vashti refused to show up at his request, and so she was deposed. Now, that's the third year of his reign. In the seventh year of his reign, we'll see in chapter 2 and verse 16, Esther is made queen. So, when did Xerxes or Ahasuerus begin to miss Vashti, and what was he doing for 4 years? If we read through the calendar here, you think, well, okay, if we don't pay attention to the years and the months, it seems like, a couple weeks later, Esther's made queen. It's a 4-year process, folks. It took some time to get this accomplished. So what was he doing for 4 years? First of all, to answer that second question, he took the attack on Greece. The banquets in chapter 3 were held in the third year of his reign. It took about a year to get everything amassed, an army and a navy, a massive navy and a massive army. Estimates run 10,000 plus. Depending on who you talk to, maybe up to 150,000 men in his army or more, and a number of ships, all that were destroyed at the Battle of Salamis. The army was defeated at the Battle of Thermopylae. And so it was a failure, but this attack took the 5th and 6th years of his reign. And at the end of the 6th year, he wintered in Sardis. And while he was there, he attempted to have an affair with his sister-in-law, his brother's wife. She refused him, and so he arranged for her to be her daughter to be married to his son, and then he had an affair with her. So she was both his niece and his sister-in-law. Now, if you read through the book of Esther, Ahasuerus or Xerxes is presented in a pretty good light. In reality, he was not that good a fellow. He was pretty, well, you fill in the blank there. He was not that nice of a guy. He was a polygamist. He had countless affairs, some of them very scandalous. But perhaps he began to miss Vashti when he woke up after this banquet, after he sobered up perhaps. And he regretted his decree, the rashness of his decision. Maybe he realized what he had done too late. Maybe while he was off going to the war, while he was preparing for the war, somewhere in that time frame, he began to miss Vashti and realized what he had done. So he asked his counselors, "What should I do?" And then make this statement, backing up to verse 2. let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. So, here's the requirements. She had to be beautiful. She had to be young. And that word stuck in there to indicate she had to be of a marriageable age. So depending on your culture and where you live and what your culture believed, she was anywhere from age 12 to 20. Now that may raise some eyebrows. It's generally expected that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was 12 or 13 when Jesus was born. That was the Jewish idea. We may not like that idea. Most fathers want their daughters married when they turn 30 or 35, maybe 40. We sometimes don't have a choice on that. So, how we think of it, how we view it, and how they did are two different things. So that's what we mean by beautiful young. And she, of course, had to be a virgin. But how was this process done? You look at verse 3. Let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom. There were 127 provinces. One overseer for each province. And they would gather every beautiful young virgin and bring them to the citadel in Susa, to the harem, and to the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the women. And let them each have all their cosmetics to make them pretty. Now, how long did that take place? When we read this, just casually read it and don't think about what's going on here, this took some time, folks. I don't know how well you can see the map in the background there, but the Persian Empire was a massive place. It took 7 to 9 days for a courier or group of couriers to take a message from Susa, the capital, to Sardis, the more extreme end on the west side. It would take about that much time to go to Ethiopia, about that much time to go to the Indus Valley, the other border of the kingdom. That's a straight shot. Now, to get this message off the main drag into all the little cities and provinces throughout the empire, and some of this area was not nice, level terrain. They hadn't come through the bulldozers yet and leveled it out. So making this trip to get this message spread across the country, the empire, took several weeks. Now, collect all the pretty girls. Then escort them back to Susa. So if this decision was made before he went to Greece for that attack in his 5th year, you got a couple of years for this to take place. Now, the couriers were riding fast horses. All these girls kidnapped, basically, and taken back to Susa, they didn't ride fast horses. They were put in carts, maybe drawn by oxen. Maybe they were put in baskets and carried on camels. That may kind of raise your eyebrows. But yeah, they may have been carried on camels, actually sitting in a basket. Maybe 4 on one camel. We think, well, that's kind of a weird way to travel, but how they did it, how they got them there, it took a while. It took Abraham to go from Ur of the Chaldees, which is not too far from where Susa was, to the land of Canaan several months, like maybe 6. Of course, he was pushing flocks and herds, and it was not an easy trip. It took the wise men to get from that area to child Jesus a year and a half to make their trip. And again, they were probably not in a hurry, on a leisurely stroll, but still, this is not a trip that you take in a hurry. They weren't jumping on an airplane, flying them out. This was a job. So this took quite a bit of time. Next idea, when you read through this, how many girls were brought in from all over the empire? Well, I did a little math, just for fun. There are 127 provinces. So if we got the most beautiful girl, that's 127 girls. But it says every beautiful girl. So if we say there are 3 from each province, that's 499 girls. But let's jump it up. let's say there are 5 from each province. That's 635 girls. Now we'll read that Esther, when she's brought in, she is given 7 maidens to take care of her. So if we just have 5 girls from every province, along with their 7 maidens, that's 5,080 girls brought into Susa. That is a pretty good sized dormitory. You think about that. When I was in college, my sophomore year, our dorm mother, that's what we called them back then, got married. She was courting this fella. They decided to get married. They got married at the beginning of spring break. They had a week-long honeymoon, and we teased her when we got back from spring break. She got married, and a week later she had 110 boys of college age under her care. She was our dorm mother, he was our dorm father, so that's what we called him. Think about that, how massive an operation this was and where they all went. Now, I did a little other research just for fun, so that's if we count just the provinces. But what if we go to each city in the province? Just for fun, I found out there are, by this record, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, there are 718 high schools in the state of Alabama. 718. If we selected 3 girls, the 3 most prettiest girls from each senior class, that's 2,154 girls. If we got the 5 prettiest girls from each senior class, that's 3,590 girls. And with each of them having their 7 maidens, that's 17,232 girls in Susa the palace. That, I don't know where to start estimating. How many women were brought into the palace just for this selection process? So, when you look at this, you think, well, that's not that many. Folks, that's a lot of girls brought in. And they each would have their opportunity with the king, we think. So this could take a while. But, chapter 2, verse 5. Let's meet the 2 principal characters of our story. Now there was at the citadel in Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, or Mordecai, or Marduk. Marduk was a Babylonian god, their chief god. Can it be that Mordecai was named after Marduk? Not that he worshiped Marduk, but that's just a common name that they used, okay? Like we use Samuel or John or James today. Just a common name. Okay, so this Mordecai, who was the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who had been exiled with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Mordecai is called here the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Problem. Kish was the father of Saul, King Saul. Shimei, his son, was the one who cursed David when he ran away from Absalom. We'll come back to this in a minute. Jair, we have no idea who he was. We got issues with the chronology here. If he was taken into exile with Jeconiah in 597, if Mordecai was taken into exile with Jeconiah, Nebuchadnezzar made 3 attacks on Jerusalem. In 606, he came and attacked Jerusalem. He took away the princes of Judah. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're in that group in 606. Taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar. In 597, he came back and he took Jeconiah captive. This is when Mordecai was taken captive. Nebuchadnezzar came back in 586, and destroyed the temple and so forth during the time of Jeremiah. If Mordecai was taken with Jeconiah, these events occur in the 7th year of Xerxes, that's 479. Mordecai is going to be 118, 120 years old or more. Or more. That's pretty aged. If we understand that Mordecai was taken captive with Jeconiah. In the book of Hebrews, the Hebrew writer says that Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek. Now, if you know your chronology, Abraham, in Genesis 14, he was the one who paid tithes to Melchizedek. And then later, Isaac was born, and then later, Jacob was born, and then even later, Levi was born. So how could Levi pay tithes to Melchizedek when he was 4 generations away? Well, it's understood that's figurative in the person of Abraham, his ancestor. So can this be that this is just a figure of speech? Kish was the father of King Saul. Okay, we said that a while ago, 1 Samuel 9. Shimei was a son of Gera, not son of Kish. And he's the one, when David was running away from Absalom in 2 Samuel 16, he's the one who cursed David. In fact, he was up on a ridge throwing rocks and dust at David and his people and cursing him. Now, we think he did that because he, being perhaps related to Saul somehow or the other, he was still angry about David taking Saul's place. Now, there's a whole little story there, so that may be an idea there. But Mordecai must have been born during the exile. And these names, Kish, Shimei, and Jair, were recycled names. They were family names. They're used over and over again. And perhaps Kish was taken captive with Jeconiah, and that would kind of make a little bit better sense, rather than Mordecai being taken, because he'd be pretty old at that time. If Mordecai was a Benjaminite, Esther, his cousin, would have been from Benjamin as well. And there are some who try to, well, let me put it this way. Some people call themselves scholars, try to make up something that just ain't there. And they think there's a reason to make it up. Since Esther was of the tribe of Benjamin, and Mordecai was somehow related to Kish, that's thinking this father of Saul, then Esther was a descendant of Saul and deserved to be the queen because of her kingly ancestry. Now, if you can make sense out of that and about $5 will buy you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I mean, that just doesn't make logical sense. But there's some who try to stretch that out and say, because of this, she had... No, don't just kind of take that, not with a grain of salt, but the whole box of salt. That'd probably be the best way to do it. Her name was Hadassah. That's her Hebrew name. Hadassah means myrtle, which used to be a common name a number of years ago. Esther, it was her Persian name, and it means star. And it's very much kin to the word for Venus, which is Ishtar, and Astarte, who was the goddess of love and war. Now, I haven't figured that out yet, why she's a goddess of both, but she was. So the name itself is very kin to these names. And there are some texts that would call her Astarte instead of Esther, because the spelling in Hebrew is very close to each other. And you can actually see star in Astarte and Ishtar, but that's a whole other field of study. So Mordecai was to be born during the exile, Esther probably as well, but her parents died, so Mordecai takes her as his cousin and raises her. So we assume she is much younger than Mordecai, but we can't prove any of that. All right, verse 8. The preparation. So it came about when the command and decree of the king were heard, many young ladies were gathered to the citadel of Susa and to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace in custody of Hegai, who was in charge of the women. Now, you just think of what that job was, to take care of all that many women. Anyway, now the young lady pleased him and found favor with him, so he quickly provided her with cosmetics and food and gave her 7 choice maids. Hang on a minute, there we go. 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. When Esther comes in, Haggai notices her. Now, maybe he chose her, but she found favor in his sight. And watch for that phrase, it comes up again. And he gave her 7 choice maids to care for her. Now, Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make them known. And every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. So Esther found favor with Haggai, and he moves her up in a choice room. Now, if we can do some guessing on this and some speculation, in the harem there were numbers of rooms, and she was given one closest to the front, one that was would be later inhabited by a queen or her maids. However, we figure that she's moved to a place where she would be in a prime position to be early in the parade of women that go see the king. She's provided cosmetics, special food, 7 maids, and the best place in the harem. Now, there were some... The book of Esther, backing up a little bit, does not mention the name of God in any shape, form, or fashion. We told that a couple of weeks ago. In the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, the book of Esther is not found. And there's a lot of speculation as to why that's not there. The other 38 books of the Old Testament are all there. Esther is not. Because Esther was not found there, and because Esther does not mention God in any shape, form, or fashion, there is an apocryphal book called The Rest of Esther, which tries to compensate for the lack of the things that are not in Esther. It's never mentioned that they pray. None of the Jewish holidays are mentioned. And if you had a Catholic Bible, you probably would find there are 14 apocryphal books. And there's not a whole lot said in the rest of Esther that's not in the book itself. It's kind of repetition, but there's some embellishments there. These books are not inspired. They don't belong in the Old Testament. Most of them are written between Malachi and John the Baptist. They contradict each other. They contradict some of the rest of the scriptures. And so they're generally ruled out as inspired and have a historical value but no inspirational value. The Catholic Church decided, 300 years after Christ, that they belong in the Old Testament, but they usually are separated into separate sections. Oftentimes they're between Malachi and Matthew, and they're labeled as apocryphal, which means not inspired, not accepted as Scripture. But in this book, the rest of Esther, there's a lot of things said about Esther. But the question is raised. There's nothing in the book that says that she kept the Sabbath, that she sent sacrifices, that she paid tithes, that she enjoyed any of the other Jewish festivals. And so there are folks that wonder, was she really a Jew? Did she, like Daniel, require special food? You go back and read Daniel, when they were taken to Babylon, he and his 3 buddies, they said, we're not going to eat all this stuff, we want this menu. And when they ate that menu, they were better than the other guys, and so forth. So did Esther require special diet? And again, that's somebody drawing straws and trying to reach for something that may or may not be there, and spending more time than probably is necessary analyzing stuff that doesn't exist. She was not to reveal that she was Jewish. Mordecai asked her to do this. And I think there's 2 reasons for this. One, it kind of sets the stage for what's going to happen. But two, the Persians, as a general rule, tolerated but did not appreciate the Jews. They were part of the empire, but they were not valued, maybe I could say. And so if we keep her nationality secret, then perhaps that would keep from other problems. Mordecai walked in front of the court every day. Somehow or another, he was in a position. Maybe he was a porter at the gate. Maybe he was a gatekeeper. Maybe he was in some position outside of the immediate court of the king. But he had access to walk around in this area. I don't know how public it was for everybody, but he was there. And he was able somehow, either through one of the eunuchs or through one of Esther's maidens, to find out how she was doing. And he kept up this communication with her by some means that we're not real sure. Now, verse 12, she was given 12 months for purification and preparation. Not just her, every one of the girls that were brought in. So just kind of magnify how this was going to work. You've got this girl and her 7 maidens in one room. It ain't your normal bedroom. This was a massive area. Probably had several rooms and several closets, we would call them, for clothing and other stuff, and other stuff, and other stuff. Not to mention the shoes, of course. Okay, so 6 months they were to spend in oil of myrrh. Now, myrrh comes from a plant from southern Arabia. It's very expensive, but it's what they used. They didn't have Jergens skincare. They didn't have Vaseline, any of those things then, or whatever we might use today. They didn't have this nice moisturizing stuff. And in that climate, skin would dry out. She had 6 months, and depending on who you read, it was soaking in baths of oil or a daily rub down with this oil of myrrh. More than one a day, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 a day. Complete rub down in this oil. Now, folks, that would make your skin pretty soft. There were another 6 months that they would spend in spices and cosmetics. I read that they would be in this room and they would burn the spices. And they've actually found these spice burners. We would call them incense burners. That would be, I guess, the best picture for us. And the smoke of that spice would actually be absorbed into their skin and into their clothing. Most of us, sometime or another, have been around a fire. Maybe you had a bonfire, or you're burning limbs and leaves and stuff in the backyard, or you had a fire in the fireplace and you got close to it, and you will absorb the smell of that fire. When I was a Boy Scout, we'd go camping, come back, and everything we had smelled like campfire because we were around it all the time. So it was absorbed into our clothing, absorbed into our hair, even into our skin. All right, do this for 6 months. She's going to feel pretty. She's going to smell pretty. Not to mention all the cosmetics that were applied to make her pretty. Once prepared, each girl had one night with the king. She was given anything that she desired. And if the king was not pleased, she was sent to the second harem. Let's go down to verse 12 of chapter 2. Now, when the turn of each young lady came to go into the king Ahasuerus, after the end of her 12 months, it's okay. They didn't all start on the first day together. They were started on this 12-month regimen when they came in. And so this girl, Esther, may have started in, let's say, December. But this girl who came in from Ethiopia didn't get started until April. And this girl who came in from India, she didn't get started until June. So they each had their own 12 months to go through before they could come in, so whatever. So it's kind of staggered out. So when each turn, or each lady had her turn, at the end of 12 months, after the regulations of the women, for 6 days of their beautification, complete as follows: 6 months of oil of myrrh, 6 months of spices and cosmetics. The young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything that she desired was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem, to the custody of Xerxes, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not again go into the king unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. Once prepared, they spend one night with the king. If he didn't like her, if he was not pleased with her, she was sent to the second harem, never to see the king again, unless he specifically called her by name. If there were some 5,000 girls from this parade, how would he remember their names? I have trouble remembering my name from day to day. Imagine that, to see a girl for one night and remember who she was. Did he keep a record, a log? I don't know. But what kind of life did these girls have? Those not chosen. They were taken from their family. They never got to see their family again. They were basically locked in the harem. They had no husband. They had no children. They had no whatever women would like to have in that kind of a relationship, they didn't have. If they had friends, that were girls in the harem or their maidens. Or maybe they had some kind of friendship with some of the eunuchs who watched over and took care of them. They were in the lap of luxury. They had anything they desired or wanted, food, raiment, and so forth. And they died in the harem and maybe never saw the king again. It's hard to imagine what that life was like. I'm sure, being as there were a bunch of females there, there's probably some situations where there are arguments, discussions, fights. There may have been plenty of times they were quite friendly and jovial. How do they entertain themselves? How do they spend their days? Let your imagination go on that. Chapter 2, verse 15. When the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came to go into the king, she did not request anything except what Hegai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. That's important. Tebeth the 10th, 7th year of his reign. We'll come back to that in a minute. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and his servants. He also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. Now that reads like it happened the next day. It's going to take a week or two to get the message out to all the provinces that this day's a holiday. So probably that night she found favor, she was made queen, and a month later they have this big party. And everybody in the province, everybody in the kingdom has a holiday. That means the mail didn't run, the garbage didn't pick up, and so forth, okay? At her turn, she took only what was advised. The girl before her, before her, before her, they may have required all kinds of riches, all kinds of jewels, all kinds of frou-frou. I never could figure out what's frou-frou, not just frou, but it's frou-frou. Took all that stuff with her. But Esther said to the Hegai, "What do you recommend?" He was the one who would know the king best and what the king desired. So he recommended this, and that's what she took. No more and no less. Esther found favor with everyone. Found favor first with Hegai, Now with all the other girls around her, and then with the king. Verse 17, she was loved by Xerxes, crowned as queen, great banquet, and so forth. Now, the 10th of Tebeth, the 7th year of his reign, would have been 479 BC. Tebeth corresponds with our December, January. Okay. Our calendar is Gregorian/Julian. Okay, set up by the Caesars, improved by Pope Gregory, 300 or so AD. Our months and our days are named after Roman gods. Sunday, the sun god. Monday, the moon god. Tuesday rhymes with fishing. I don't know which god that would be. Saturday, Saturn. Okay, so each one, and January, Janus. So each one of these have a relationship to their theology. Thankfully, not ours. But the Hebrew calendar, which seems to be the one that's referred to here, because this written by Hebrew would have used Hebrew calendar names, their calendar begins differently than ours. They have two calendars. They have a religious calendar and they have a civil calendar. Now let's get confusing. The religious calendar begins in our spring. The Passover is the 14th day of their first month in their religious calendar. Their calendar is based on the cycle of the moon. Now go back to Exodus. God says, Moses, day's the beginning of your month and the beginning of your year. Okay? Got it, God. It's the new moon. In 2 weeks, do your math, it'll be a full moon. On the 10th day, pull out the lamb. 14th day, sacrifice him. It's the Passover. That's why we always have a full moon at Easter. Because the Jewish calendar begins on the new moon that follows the first day of spring. That's why Easter bounces around like that. It's always falls on the way that works. So that means that their month begins somewhere in the middle of our months. And they followed a 28, maybe 29-day month. Do your math, they're going to come up short, right? Because we realize the earth, it takes the earth a year, 365 days to go around the sun, and the moon takes 28, 29 days to make its cycle, and somewhere along the line, we're missing a few days. So we have a leap year to put us back on schedule. They had a leap month. They had, every once in a while, they'd insert a 13th month, a leap month. It may be a week long. It may be 4 days long. It may be 2 days long. It was not put in by any schedule like ours is. So what they did, the way we do it, wholly different. But their Tebeth would run around our middle of March or December, middle of January. In the 7th year of his reign. Now, Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, returned from his Greece expedition in the 7th month of the year, of his 7th year. So it's 3 months before Esther is found. So is she that far along the way? Yeah, maybe so. All right, verse 19. When the virgins were gathered together the second time, I'll let that soak a minute. When the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her as she had done when under his care. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's officials from those who guarded the door, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. But the plot became known to Mordecai. He told Queen Esther. Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Now, when the plot was investigated and found to be so, they were both hanged on a gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. Now, that's going to come up later on as being very important. So how does Mordecai save the king? All right, first of all, what's this second gathering of the virgins? Nobody really seems to know. When it was, what it was for, what they did, there's speculation, but nothing really makes good sense. Because this happens after Esther is made queen. Now, does he run them around again for a second queen, or third or fourth? Because Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, was a polygamist. He had several wives. There's another queen or two who are not even mentioned in the book of Esther. We talked about them, I think, last week. So, not really sure what that means or what that's going to imply. The best explanation is it was at this gathering when this was going on in their time frame that Mordecai discovered this plot of Bigthan and Teresh against Xerxes. They planned to somehow assassinate the king. But when found out and when investigated, they were hanged on a gallows. What's in your mind? Hanged on a gallows. Every one of us is thinking Wild West, trapdoor, or a horse, and a hangman's noose. They pull the lever, the guy drops. No. They didn't have a gallows like that. The word gallows here is rather loose in wording or interpretation. It seems more that they were crucified after they were executed. So first they're executed, maybe even beheaded, and then their bodies are crucified. Now you back up to David's time. And there were a couple of times there when David was becoming king, when he was running away from Saul. When Saul died, you remember, and the guy came and said, I killed Saul and Jonathan. And they executed him, and then they hung him on a tree. And then they took him down at sunset because the law says, curses everyone who hangs on a tree. That was said in anticipation of Jesus' crucifixion, by the way. But the Persians, they did crucify, but it seems like the crucified folks are already executed. Now, the Romans took the concept of persecution or crucifixion from the Persians, and they perfected it. That's a weird word to use in that situation, but yeah, they did. They made it even more painful and more crucial. And they practiced crucifying folks that were alive. So it seems like the Persians executed the guy first, then crucified him as a public shame. Or it might be better understood that they were impaled. That means they take a large, long post or tree trunk, telephone pole, sharpen it, build a platform, gallows, beside it, hold the body out, and drop the body onto that stick, post, telephone pole. The idea is for the point to go in at the stomach and come out somewhere around the neck. And the body will be left there until there's nothing but bones that fall down to the bottom, consumed by the birds, the insects, and whatever. Often, the individual was dead first. But often as not, he was still alive when they dropped him on the pole. It seems that that might be a better idea of what's going on here. We say that is vile, that is cruel, that is terrible, but that seems to be the way it was done. And it was recorded in the Chronicles of the King. Now, each king kept his own set of records and chronicles. He had a scribe, and that was his job, to write down everything that was said and done by the king, by his decrees, so that he could later back, it's kind of like a diary. Go back and read what had happened. That's going to come up later on in the case of Mordecai. So, chapter 3, next week, we'll look at Haman and his plot against Mordecai. And that raises other questions about, was there some ancient antagonism between Haman and Mordecai. We'll talk about that next week. God bless you. Have a great day, a great week. Stay warm. Be safe.